The envelope sat unopened on Vincent Armstrong's desk for 3 days before he finally tore it open. And what he found inside made his carefully controlled world tilt on its axis. An invitation to his late wife's childhood best friend's funeral, a woman he had never met but whose daughter was apparently trying to connect the old circle. Vincent stared at the cream-colored card stock, his jaw tight. He had stopped going to funerals 2 years ago when he buried Sarah. The CEO of Armstrong Industries, a manufacturing empire worth over $300 million, could afford to avoid anything that reminded him of loss. At 42, he had already lived what felt like 3 lifetimes. The first with his parents before the car accident that took them when he was 19. The second building his father's failing company into a powerhouse. The third with Sarah, until cancer stole her away 18 months ago. He should throw the invitation away. He had work to do, a factory expansion in Ohio to oversee, a board meeting in 2 days. But something about the handwritten note at the bottom stopped him. My mother spoke of Sarah often. She would want us to meet. Please come if you can. The reception will be at our home. Margaret Vance. Vincent ran his hand through his dark hair, the silver at his temples catching the afternoon light streaming through his corner office windows. Sarah had mentioned Rebecca, her childhood friend who moved to Vermont decades ago. They had exchanged Christmas cards, the occasional phone call. He vaguely remembered Sarah crying one December when Rebecca's husband died of a heart attack. That had been 4, maybe 5 years ago. Against his better judgment, Vincent found himself 3 days later driving his Range Rover up a tree-lined street in Burlington, Vermont, following his GPS to the address listed on the invitation. The funeral service had ended an hour ago. He told himself he was only coming to the reception to pay respects and leave. The house was a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. Nothing like his own sprawling estate in Connecticut, but there was something warm about it that made his chest ache. Cars lined the street. Vincent parked and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He could still turn around. He got out of the car. The front door was open, voices drifting out along with the smell of coffee and something baked. Vincent stepped inside, immediately feeling like an intruder. People clustered in small groups, talking in hushed tones. An older woman touched his arm. "Are you here for Rebecca?" "There's coffee in the kitchen, dear. Margaret is in the living room greeting everyone." Vincent nodded his thanks and moved through the hallway, his 6'2" frame making him feel conspicuous. The living room was crowded, but he spotted her immediately. She stood near the fireplace, a slender woman in a simple black dress, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a low bun. She was listening intently to an elderly couple, her hand on the woman's arm, nodding with genuine compassion in her expression. Even in grief, she held herself with a quiet grace that made Vincent pause. Margaret Vance looked to be in her late 30s, maybe 40. There was a weariness around her eyes, but also a strength in the set of her shoulders. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up and their eyes met across the room. Hers were hazel, he noticed, flecked with gold. She excused herself from the couple and made her way toward him, weaving through the mourners with practiced ease. Up close, she was even more striking, though she wore minimal makeup and her face was pale with exhaustion. "You must be Vincent Armstrong," she said, extending her hand. Her voice was soft but steady. "Thank you so much for coming. Sarah showed my mother pictures of you both. I recognized you from them." Vincent shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "I'm sorry for your loss. Sarah spoke very fondly of your mother. They had a special friendship." Margaret's eyes glistened, but she blinked rapidly, maintaining her composure. "I'm glad you could make it. I know it's a long drive from Connecticut. Can I get you something? Coffee? There's enough casserole in the kitchen to feed an army. I'm fine, thank you. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled by the murmur of other conversations. Margaret glanced around the room, then back at Vincent. Would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I could use some air, and I'd like to talk to you if that's all right. Vincent followed her through the kitchen and out onto a back deck that overlooked a small garden. The September air was crisp, leaves just beginning to turn. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself and took a deep breath. I'm sorry, she said. It's been a long week. I keep having to be on for everyone, and it's exhausting. You don't need to apologize. She turned to face him, leaning against the deck railing. My mother talked about Rebecca and Sarah's friendship like it was something sacred. When she got sick last month, one of the things she made me promise was to reach out to Sarah's family. She didn't know that Sarah had. Margaret trailed off, her expression pained. Passed away 18 months ago, Vincent finished quietly. Ovarian cancer. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God. Vincent, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known, I never would have sent that invitation. You shouldn't have to come to another funeral so soon after I chose to come, Vincent interrupted gently. You didn't force me. She studied him for a long moment, and Vincent had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen for the first time in months. Most people looked at him and saw the CEO, the millionaire, the powerful businessman. Margaret Vance looked at him and seemed to recognize a fellow traveler in grief. Your mother's husband, Vincent said. Sarah mentioned he passed away some years back. Margaret nodded, a sad smile crossing her face. David, 5 years ago in March, heart attack. He was only 52. She looked out at the garden. My mother never really recovered. They were high school sweethearts. She tried to stay strong for me, but I think part of her died with him. This past year especially, it was like she just started fading away. How old are you? Vincent asked, then immediately felt foolish for the blunt question, but Margaret didn't seem offended. 38, you, 42. Still young enough that people tell us we have our whole lives ahead of us, Margaret said with a bitter edge, as if that's supposed to be comforting. Vincent huffed a laugh, surprising himself. Or they say that time heals all wounds. Or that they're in a better place now. Or that at least you had the time you did together. Margaret turned to him, and for the first time since he arrived, he saw a genuine smile on her face. It transformed her features, making her eyes light up despite the sadness. It's awful, isn't it? Everyone means well, but they have no idea what to say. The worst is when they avoid mentioning them at all, like speaking their name will hurt you more than pretending they never existed. Yes, Margaret's voice rose with emotion. I want to talk about my mother. I want to tell stories and remember her, but everyone tiptoes around it. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the shared understanding passing between them like a bridge. Inside, Vincent could hear someone calling Margaret's name. She sighed. I should get back in there. But Vincent, thank you for coming and for this conversation. It helped more than you know. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? The words came out before Vincent could stop them, surprising them both. Margaret blinked. Dinner. Vincent scrambled to make it sound less like what it definitely was. I'm staying in Burlington overnight. I have some business to wrap up. You've been hosting everyone, taking care of arrangements. You should let someone take care of you for an evening. No pressure, just dinner between two people who understand. He could see her wavering, uncertainty crossing her features. Then she nodded slowly. All right, yes, that would be nice. They exchanged phone numbers and Vincent left shortly after, his mind spinning. What was he doing? He hadn't asked a woman to dinner since Sarah got sick. This wasn't a date, he told himself. Just two people who had both lost their spouses sharing a meal, completely innocent. So why did his heart feel lighter than it had in 18 months? Vincent picked Margaret up at 7 the next evening. She had changed from the black funeral dress into a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair down around her shoulders in loose waves. She looked younger, more relaxed, though exhaustion still shadowed her eyes. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up," she admitted as she slid into the passenger seat of his Range Rover. "I half thought maybe I imagined the whole conversation yesterday." "I'm a man of my word," Vincent said, pulling away from the curb. "I hope you're hungry." "I made reservations at a place my assistant recommended." The restaurant was a small Italian place downtown, intimate without being romantic, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. They were seated at a corner table, and for the first few minutes they made safe small talk about the menu, the weather, Burlington itself. But once they ordered and the wine arrived, Margaret leaned back in her chair and gave Vincent a wry look. "So, are we going to do this all night?" Polite chit-chat while avoiding anything real, Vincent felt his lips twitch into a smile. "I thought we'd make it through appetizers at least. I've had 3 days of polite chit-chat. I'm all out." She took a sip of wine. "Tell me something true, Vincent Armstrong. What's the hardest part?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He turned his wine glass slowly on the table, watching the light refract through the red liquid. "Mornings," he said finally. "I wake up and for just a second I forget. Then I remember and I have to lose her all over again." Margaret's eyes glistened. "For me it's bedtime. That's when David and I would always talk about our days, make plans, just be together. Now I lie there and the silence is deafening." "Do you work?" Vincent asked, grateful to shift slightly. "I'm a landscape architect. I have my own small firm here in Burlington. Mostly residential projects, some commercial work. It's good. I like creating beautiful spaces, helping people feel at home in their yards." She paused. "My mother watched my son while I worked. Now I don't know what I'm going to do." "You have a son." Margaret's face brightened immediately. "Michael, he's 12. He's staying with a friend tonight, which is good. He needs normal right now, not his mother falling apart." "I'm sure you're not falling apart." "I'm holding on by a thread," Margaret said honestly, "but I have to be strong for Michael. He lost his father 5 years ago, now his grandmother. I'm all he has left." Vincent felt his chest constrict. The idea of being responsible for a child through all this grief seemed impossible. "That's a lot of weight to carry." "What choice do I have?" Margaret shrugged. "You do what you have to do. I'm sure you understand. Running a company while grieving can't be easy." "Work helps, actually. Gives me something to focus on. Meetings, decisions, problems to solve. It's when I'm alone that it gets hard." Their appetizers arrived and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Margaret asked, "Did you and Sarah have children?" Vincent shook his head. "We tried for years. It just never happened. We were talking about adoption when she got sick." He swallowed hard. "After she died, part of me was grateful we didn't have kids, that no child had to lose their mother. But another part of me wishes desperately that I had a piece of her still with me." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly before pulling back. The touch was brief but grounding. "I'm sorry, that's a different kind of loss." "Tell me about Michael," Vincent said, wanting to lighten the mood. "What's he like?" Margaret's whole face transformed when she talked about her son. Vincent found himself mesmerized by her animation, as she described a bright, funny kid who loved baseball and hated math homework, who was trying to grow his hair out like his favorite YouTube gamer, and had just discovered a passion for cooking. "He makes these elaborate breakfasts on Sunday mornings," Margaret said, laughing. "Last week it was lemon ricotta pancakes from scratch. The week before, shakshuka. He watches these cooking shows and then insists on trying everything. He sounds remarkable. He is. Margaret's smile turned sad. He looks just like David. Same dark curls, same crooked smile. Sometimes it's hard to look at him. But mostly it's a gift. Mostly it's a gift, Margaret agreed softly. They talked through dinner and dessert, the conversation flowing easily between heavy and light topics. Vincent learned that Margaret had studied at Cornell, that she loved hiking and was terrible at tennis, that she'd lived in Boston for a few years before moving back to Vermont when her father got sick. Margaret learned that Vincent had built Armstrong Industries from near bankruptcy after his father died, that he played piano but hadn't touched it since Sarah's funeral, that he ran 5 miles every morning because it was the only time his mind went quiet. When Vincent drove Margaret home, it was nearly 11. He walked her to the door, hands in his pockets. "Thank you for tonight," Margaret said. "I needed it more than I realized. So did I." Vincent hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind if I called you sometime? Not for anything, just to talk." Margaret smiled, and Vincent felt his heart do something strange in his chest. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." He waited until she was inside before driving back to his hotel. That night, for the first time in 18 months, Vincent slept through until morning without waking up in a panic, reaching for someone who was no longer there. 2 weeks later, Vincent found himself calling Margaret from his office in Connecticut. It was late afternoon, and he had just finished a particularly brutal board meeting. His finger hovered over her name in his contacts for a full minute before he pressed dial. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Vincent, hi, how are you? Honestly. I just spent 3 hours listening to my board argue about profit margins and market projections, and I felt my soul leaving my body. I needed to hear a friendly voice." Margaret laughed, the sound warm through the phone. "Well, if it makes you feel better, I just spent 2 hours explaining to a client why we cannot, in fact, install a koi pond in a yard with 3 large dogs and 0 fencing. That does make me feel marginally better." They talked for over an hour about work and nothing, about books they were reading and shows they were watching. It felt natural, easy. When they finally hung up, Vincent realized he was smiling. It became a pattern. Vincent would call Margaret every few days, sometimes more. They texted occasionally, silly things or photos. Margaret sent him a picture of Michael covered in flour after a baking disaster. Vincent sent her a photo of the view from his office window with the caption, "Prison with a nice view." A month after they met, Vincent found himself driving back to Burlington on a Friday afternoon. He told himself it was because he had business in Boston anyway, and Burlington was only a few hours further. Not because he wanted to see Margaret. Not because her voice on the phone wasn't enough anymore. He called her from the road. "What are you doing tomorrow?" "Tomorrow is Saturday, so I'll probably sleep until the late hour of 7, watch Michael's baseball game, do laundry, maybe tackle the garden before the frost comes." "Why?" "I'm driving up to Burlington tonight. Have dinner with me tomorrow." There was a pause. "Vincent, that's a 6-hour drive, I'm aware." "You're driving 6 hours to have dinner with me. Is that a problem?" Another pause, then Margaret's voice came back softer. "No, that's not a problem." "What time?" They met at a different restaurant this time, a French place with a quiet ambience. Margaret wore a dark green dress that brought out the gold in her eyes, and Vincent couldn't stop looking at her. "You drove all this way," she said once they were seated. "I still can't believe it." "I wanted to see you." Vincent met her eyes. "Is that strange? We barely know each other, but I feel like I can talk to you in a way I can't talk to anyone else." "It's not strange," Margaret said quietly. "I feel the same way. Everyone else in my life knew my mother, knew David. They have their own grief mixed up with mine. But you're separate from all that. With you, I can just be Margaret. Not the widow, not the grieving daughter, just me. I know exactly what you mean. They ordered and talked, the conversation flowing as easily as it had on the phone. Margaret told him about Michael's baseball team making the playoffs, about a new project she was designing for a local park. Vincent told her about the Ohio factory expansion, about his younger sister calling him last week to announce she was pregnant with her third child. "How do you feel about that?" Margaret asked perceptively, being an uncle again. Vincent rotated his wine glass. "Happy for her, sad for me. Sarah would have loved being an aunt. She was so good with kids." "David wanted more children," Margaret said. "After Michael was born, we talked about having another. But then my career was taking off and David's business was growing and we kept saying we'd do it later. Then he died and I realized we'd run out of later." She looked up at Vincent. "We're not very good at living in the present, are we? Always planning for a future that may never come." "What would you do differently?" Vincent asked. "If you could go back." Margaret considered this. "I'd worry less. About money, about work, about stupid things that don't matter. I'd take more vacations. I'd tell David I loved him more often." She paused. "But I'd also know that even if I'd done all that, I'd still have regrets, because he'd still be gone and I'd still be here wishing for more time. Sarah and I had a fight the day before she went to the doctor about the pain in her abdomen," Vincent said quietly. "A stupid fight about me working too much. She said I cared more about the company than her. I said she was being dramatic. We didn't speak that whole evening." He swallowed hard. "The next day they found the cancer, stage 4. 6 months later she was gone." "I'd give anything to take back that night." Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. This time she didn't pull away. "She knew you loved her, Vincent. One fight doesn't erase a marriage. Logically, I know that. But at 3 in the morning, logic doesn't help much." They held hands across the table until the waiter came with their entrees. And even then, Vincent could still feel the warmth of her touch. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront, the October air cold enough that they could see their breath. Margaret shivered and Vincent shrugged out of his jacket, draping it around her shoulders without asking. She pulled it tighter around herself, looking up at him with something in her eyes that made Vincent's breath catch. "This is becoming something," Margaret said softly. "Isn't it?" Vincent knew he should deny it, should step back, should remind them both that they were two broken people who met at a funeral. Instead, he said, "Yes. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I am either." They stood looking at each other, the water lapping gently against the dock beside them. Then Margaret rose on her toes and kissed him, brief and soft and tasting of wine and possibility. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide. "I'm sorry." "I shouldn't have." Vincent cupped her face in his hands and kissed her properly, pouring 18 months of loneliness and grief and desperate hope into it. Margaret made a small sound and kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Oh," Margaret whispered. "Yeah," Vincent agreed. They stood in the cold, foreheads pressed together, neither willing to move and break the moment. "I should go home," Margaret said eventually. "Michael is with a friend, but I don't like staying out too late." Vincent drove her home, their hands linked on the console between them. At her door, he kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. "You better." Vincent drove back to his hotel with his heart pounding and his mind racing. He was falling for Margaret Vance. It terrified him. But for the first time since Sarah died, he felt something other than grief. He felt alive. The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Vincent drove to Burlington every other weekend, sometimes more. Margaret came down to Connecticut twice, arranging for Michael to stay with friends. They were taking it slow, they told themselves, being cautious. But the truth was they were falling hard and fast, unable to stop it even if they wanted to. Vincent met Michael in early November. He was terrified, which Margaret found both endearing and amusing. "He's 12, not a dragon," she teased as they drove to the baseball field where Michael had a game. "I've faced boardrooms full of hostile investors with less fear," Vincent admitted, but Michael was easy. He was a lanky kid with his mother's hazel eyes and dark curly hair, with a quick smile and an even quicker wit. He shook Vincent's hand firmly, clearly having been coached by his mother, and then immediately started talking about baseball statistics with an enthusiasm that made Vincent grin. They sat in the bleachers watching Michael play shortstop, Margaret bundled in a heavy coat with a blanket over her knees. Vincent bought them hot chocolate from the concession stand and tried to follow Margaret's explanations of what was happening on the field. "You're really bad at this," she said fondly after Vincent asked for the third time what an RBI was. "I grew up playing tennis. This is a foreign language." Michael's team won, and afterward, Vincent took them both out for pizza. Michael peppered him with questions about what it was like being a CEO, about the factory, about what kinds of things Armstrong Industries made. Vincent found himself enjoying the conversation, charmed by the kid's genuine curiosity. When they dropped Michael at home later, the boy turned to Vincent. "Are you my mom's boyfriend?" Margaret choked on nothing. "Michael, what? I'm just asking." Michael looked between them. "You make her smile a lot. She hasn't smiled much since Grandma died." Vincent glanced at Margaret, who had turned red, then back at Michael. "Would that be all right with you, if I was?" Michael shrugged with preteen nonchalance. "I guess. You seem okay, and Mom deserves to be happy." After Michael went inside, Margaret turned to Vincent. "I'm so sorry. I've talked to him about boundaries, and he's right though," Vincent interrupted. "I am your boyfriend, unless you don't want me to be." Margaret's face softened. "I want you to be." They made it official after that, though what official meant for two people in their late 30s and early 40s was different than it would have been in their 20s. It meant Vincent keeping clothes at Margaret's house. It meant Margaret having a key to his Connecticut estate. It meant slow Sunday mornings and shared dinners and conversations that stretched late into the night. It also meant dealing with the ghosts. The first time Vincent stayed over at Margaret's house, he woke at 2 in the morning to find her side of the bed empty. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the dark. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" Margaret looked up, her face wet with tears. "This was David's favorite coffee mug," she said, holding up a blue ceramic cup. "I was making tea and I grabbed it without thinking, and suddenly I miss him. I know that's awful to say when you're here, but it's not awful." Vincent sat down next to her, taking her hand. "You loved him. You're allowed to miss him. But it feels wrong, like I'm betraying both of you. You by missing him by being with you." Vincent was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I still love Sarah. I probably always will. She was my wife, my partner. Losing her doesn't change that, but loving her doesn't mean I can't love again. Those feelings don't cancel each other out. Do you?" Margaret whispered. "Love again?" Vincent met her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you, Margaret. It scares the hell out of me, but yes." Margaret started crying harder, and Vincent pulled her into his arms, letting her sob against his chest. They sat like that until the sky started to lighten, working through the complicated mess of guilt and grief and new love. A few weeks later, it was Vincent's turn. They were at his house in Connecticut when he found Sarah's wedding ring in his nightstand drawer. He had put it there the day after the funeral and hadn't opened that drawer since. But he was looking for his reading glasses, and there it was, a simple platinum band with 3 small diamonds. Margaret found him sitting on the edge of the bed, the ring in his palm, staring at it like it might hold answers. She sat down next to him, not touching but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Tell me about her." So Vincent did. He told Margaret about meeting Sarah at a charity gala when he was 28, about how she had been volunteering and wore a borrowed dress, but had more grace than anyone else in the room. He told her about their wedding on a beach in Maine, about how Sarah hated cooking but loved baking, about the way she snorted when she laughed really hard. He told her about the cancer, the treatments, the slow, terrible loss of watching someone you love fade away. Margaret listened without interrupting, her hand eventually finding his. "She sounds wonderful," Margaret said when he finished. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Vincent said. "You're both stubborn and kind and way too good for me." Margaret bumped his shoulder with hers. "We have excellent taste in men, apparently." Vincent laughed, the sound watery but genuine. He looked down at the ring, then carefully placed it back in the drawer, not throwing it away, not hiding it, just putting it in its place. "Thank you," he said to Margaret. "For what? For understanding, for being patient, for being you." Margaret kissed his temple. "We're figuring this out together, that's what matters." Christmas approached, and with it new challenges. It was Michael's first Christmas without his grandmother, Vincent's second without Sarah. They decided to spend it together at Margaret's house, creating new traditions rather than dwelling on old ones. Vincent went overboard with presents, unable to help himself. He had never had a kid to shop for and found himself wandering through stores, buying everything that might make Michael smile. Margaret scolded him, but Vincent saw the warmth in her eyes. Christmas morning, Michael tore through his presents with enthusiasm, genuinely thrilled with each gift. The baseball glove, the new video game console, the cooking class Vincent had signed him up for. But the present that made him tear up was a framed photo of Michael with his father and grandmother, one Margaret had thought was lost but Vincent had found and had restored. "How did you?" Margaret trailed off, looking at the photo in wonder. "You mentioned it once months ago. I hired someone to track it down." Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with the emotion in the room. "Figured you both deserved to have it." Michael hugged him, fierce and sudden. "Thank you," he mumbled into Vincent's chest. Vincent awkwardly patted his back, looking at Margaret helplessly. She was crying but smiling too. "Merry Christmas," she mouthed. That afternoon, after Michael went to his friend's house for a Christmas party, Margaret and Vincent sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, the tree lights glowing softly in the corner. "I got you something," Margaret said, "but I'm nervous about giving it to you." "Why nervous?" She pulled out a small, wrapped box from behind the couch cushion. Vincent opened it carefully, revealing a key on a simple keychain. "It's a key to this house," Margaret said. "But it's also more than that. It's me saying that I want you here. Not just visiting, but really here. Part of our lives, part of our family." She took a shaky breath. "I'm in love with you, Vincent. I fought it for a long time because it felt too soon, too complicated. But I can't fight it anymore. I love you." Vincent set the box down carefully and cupped Margaret's face in his hands. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd feel this way again." They kissed, slow and deep, full of promise and hope. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the world in quiet white. In January, Vincent had to fly to Ohio for the factory opening. It was a huge deal, the culmination of 2 years of work. He asked Margaret to come with him. "I can't," she said regretfully. "I have 3 client meetings this week and Michael has school. I wish I could." Vincent tried to hide his disappointment, but Margaret saw it anyway. "This is important to you, isn't it? Not just the factory, but having me there. It's the biggest project I've done since Sarah died. The first major thing that's mine alone. I want to share it with you." Margaret bit her lip, thinking, Okay, let me make some calls. Maybe I can move things around. She did come, leaving Michael with a friend's family and rescheduling 2 meetings. They flew out together on Vincent's private plane, which Margaret found both thrilling and slightly absurd. "I'm dating a man with a private plane," she said, looking around the cabin. "How is this my life?" "Technically, you're dating a man who occasionally charters a private plane," Vincent corrected. "I don't own it." "Oh well, that changes everything." Margaret grinned. "Totally normal then." The factory opening was a success. A ribbon-cutting ceremony followed by tours and speeches and a formal dinner. Vincent was in his element, commanding and confident, and Margaret found herself seeing a different side of him. Not the grieving widower or the man who made her breakfast and laughed at her bad jokes. This was Vincent Armstrong, CEO, the man who had built an empire. At the dinner, an older executive cornered Margaret. "You're the new girlfriend, right? I've known Vincent for 15 years. Never seen him smile like this. You must be special." "He's special too," Margaret said simply. That night in their hotel room, Vincent was riding high on adrenaline and success. He paced the room, talking about production numbers and expansion plans, his eyes bright with excitement. Margaret watched him fondly, curled up in an armchair. "You're amazing, you know that," she said. Vincent stopped pacing. "What? The way you command a room. The way people respect you. You built all this from nothing, through grief and loss and every obstacle imaginable. You're amazing." Vincent crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. "I couldn't have done this without you. These past few months, knowing you were in my corner, it made everything easier. You made me remember why I built this company in the first place. Not just to honor my father's memory, but because I love the work. I forgot that for a long time." Margaret ran her fingers through his hair. "I'm proud of you." "Come to Connecticut," Vincent said suddenly. "Not to visit, to live. You and Michael both. Move in with me." Margaret's hand stilled. "Vincent, that's a huge step." "I know. But I don't want to drive back and forth anymore. I don't want to sleep in a bed without you. I don't want to miss Michael's games because I'm in the wrong state." Vincent took her hands. "I love you. I love your son. I want us to be a family. Michael's school, my business, keep your business. Expand it if you want. Open an office in Connecticut. I'll help. Michael can transfer schools. There are excellent schools near my house, and it's not even that far from Burlington. You could visit your friends, your clients. We'd make it work." Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. "You've really thought about this?" "I think about it constantly. About coming home to you every night. About helping Michael with homework. About building a life together, not just stealing moments when we can." "I need to talk to Michael," Margaret said slowly. "This affects him too. I can't uproot his life without his input." "Of course. Talk to him. Think about it. I'm not going anywhere." 2 weeks later, Margaret called Vincent from Burlington. He could hear Michael in the background, talking rapidly. "Okay, someone wants to talk to you," Margaret said, and then Michael was on the phone. "Vincent, Mom says you want us to move to Connecticut." "I do, yes, but only if you're okay with it." "Will I have my own room?" "Because I'm not sharing with anyone." Vincent smiled. "You'll have your own room, big enough for all your gaming stuff and cooking equipment, and I can keep playing baseball. There's a youth league 10 minutes from my house. I already looked into it." There was a pause. "Are you going to marry my mom?" Vincent's breath caught. "I hope so, eventually, if she'll have me." "Good. She deserves someone who treats her right. My dad did, and you do too." Michael's voice turned serious. "But if you hurt her, I'll be really mad at you." "I would never hurt your mother," Vincent said seriously. "I promise you that." "Okay. Then yeah, we can move to Connecticut. It'll be cool. Your house has a pool, right? Mom showed me pictures." Margaret got back on the phone, laughing. "So I guess we're moving." "You're sure?" "I'm terrified." "But yes, I'm sure. I love you, Vincent. Let's do this." The move happened in March, a chaotic mess of boxes and furniture and deciding what to keep and what to let go. Michael adapted quickly, making friends at his new school and joining the baseball league. Margaret set up a home office in one of the spare rooms and began networking with local contractors and architects. Vincent came home every day to a house full of life. Michael's shoes by the door, Margaret's design books scattered on the coffee table, voices and laughter and music. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and nothing like the silent mausoleum his house had been for 18 months. There were adjustments. Michael wasn't always the easiest kid, sometimes sullen and withdrawn, dealing with his own grief in ways that came out sideways. Margaret and Vincent had their first real fight about boundaries and discipline, about who had the right to parent Michael and who didn't. They worked through it, learning to communicate better, to be a team. Margaret struggled with leaving her mother's house, with selling it and packing away memories. She cried for 3 days straight after the closing, and Vincent just held her, knowing there were no words that would help. But slowly, gradually, they built something new. A blended family, unconventional and imperfect but full of love. In June, Vincent took Margaret to Paris for a long weekend. Michael stayed with Vincent's sister, delighted to hang out with his cousins. It was the first time Vincent and Margaret had truly been alone together for more than a night. They walked along the Seine, visited museums, ate at tiny cafes where neither of them could pronounce the menu items correctly. On their last night, Vincent took Margaret to a restaurant overlooking the city, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance. Over dessert, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Margaret Vance, I never thought I'd find love again. I thought that part of my life was over. Then I met you at your mother's funeral, sad and lost and somehow still so strong. You taught me that loving again doesn't diminish what came before, that the heart is big enough for all of it." Margaret's eyes were already filling with tears as Vincent pulled out a small velvet box. "I love you. I love Michael. I love the life we're building together. Marry me." Not to replace what we lost, but to create something new and beautiful and ours. Vincent opened the box, revealing a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring surrounded by smaller stones. Margaret was crying openly now, nodding before he even finished. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Vincent slipped the ring on her finger, his hands shaking slightly. They stood and kissed across the table, earning applause from nearby diners. Margaret laughed through her tears, and Vincent felt his heart swell almost painfully. They called Michael from the hotel room later. He picked up on video chat, clearly having waited up. "Did you ask her?" he demanded immediately. "I did," Vincent said, turning the phone so Michael could see Margaret's left hand. "She said yes. She said yes." Michael pumped his fist. "Awesome. Does this mean I can call you Dad?" Vincent felt his throat close up. "If you want to, but only if you want to. Cool, Dad it is." Michael was trying to play it casual, but Vincent could see the emotion in his eyes. "So when's the wedding? Can I bring a date?" Margaret laughed. "You're 12. So, there's this girl in my class, Emma. She's really cool." They talked for another hour, making plans and laughing. After they hung up, Margaret curled into Vincent's side. "That kid," she said softly. "He's been through so much, lost his father, his grandmother. Now he's in a new state, new school. But he's still full of hope and love. I don't know how he does it." "He has you as a mother," Vincent said. "That helps. He has us now, both of us." They got married in September, a year and a day after they met. It was a small ceremony in Vincent's backyard, overlooking the gardens that Margaret had redesigned with native plants and flowering trees. Just close family and friends, people who mattered. Michael walked his mother down the aisle, looking proud and a little teary in his new suit. Vincent's sister was the maid of honor, having bonded with Margaret over the past months. Vincent's best man was his college roommate, one of the few friends who had stuck by him through everything. They wrote their own vows. Margaret went first, her voice steady despite the tears. Vincent, when we met, I was broken. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, just going through the motions. You taught me that broken things can heal if you give them time and patience and love. You love my son like he's your own. You honor my past while building our future. You make me laugh when I want to cry, and you hold me when I need to fall apart. I promise to love you fiercely, to challenge you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to never let a day go by without telling you how much you mean to me. Vincent had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. Margaret, I spent 18 months in darkness. I thought that was my life now, just existing in the gray. Then I met you and slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, color came back to the world. You're brave and kind and stubborn and beautiful, and somehow you chose me. You let me into your life, into your son's life, into your heart. I promise to honor that gift every single day. I promise to be the partner you deserve, the father Michael needs, the man who makes you glad you took this chance. I love you. I will always love you. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. They exchanged rings, kissed to applause and cheers, and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Margaret was glowing, and Vincent couldn't stop smiling. At the reception, Michael gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. He talked about his father, how much he missed him, but how grateful he was that his mom found Vincent. He talked about finding love after loss, about blended families, about how home was people, not places. To my mom and my dad, Michael said, raising his glass of sparkling cider. The bravest people I know. Vincent danced with Margaret under string lights as the sun set, holding her close and marveling at how life could surprise you. How in the depths of grief you could find unexpected joy. How love, real love, was strong enough to survive anything. Happy, he murmured into her hair. So happy, Margaret whispered back. So impossibly happy. 2 years later, Margaret stood in the kitchen of their home, now fully transformed with her touches everywhere. Her design books on the shelves, her photos on the walls, her plants in every window. Their home. She was making breakfast, something elaborate that Michael had taught her. Vincent came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Morning," he said, kissing her neck. "Morning yourself. Did you finish your run? 5 miles. I'm getting old, it takes longer now." Vincent was 45 now, Margaret 41. Michael was 15, tall and lanky and currently still asleep upstairs. "We need to wake Michael soon. He has that baseball tournament today." 5 more minutes, Vincent said, not letting go. They stood like that, swaying slightly, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Margaret turned in his arms and kissed him properly. "I love you," she said. "Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour. I was getting worried." Margaret laughed and pushed him away. "Go shower. You smell like sweat." Vincent headed upstairs, passing Michael's room. He knocked lightly. "Michael, time to get up, big day." 5 more minutes, came the groan. "That's what your mother said. Come on, champ. Rise and shine." Vincent showered and dressed, coming back down to find Michael at the table, inhaling pancakes while Margaret quizzed him on history facts for his upcoming test. It was so beautifully normal that Vincent had to pause and just take it in. This was his life now. This beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life. He had Margaret, who challenged him and supported him and loved him with a fierceness that still took his breath away. He had Michael, who called him dad and asked for advice about girls and homework and life. He had a home full of laughter and arguments and compromise and joy. He still thought about Sarah sometimes. Always would. But the grief was gentler now, mixed with gratitude for the time they had. He kept her picture on his desk at work, and sometimes he'd talk to her in his head, telling her about his day, about Margaret and Michael, about how he never expected this second chance at happiness. He liked to think she'd be happy for him. That wherever she was glad he found his way back to the light. That evening, after Michael's team won their tournament and they celebrated with pizza and ice cream, the three of them sat on the back deck watching the sun set over the gardens. "This is nice," Michael said. "Just us." "Yeah," Vincent agreed, his arm around Margaret. "This is perfect." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. "I never thought I'd have this again," she said softly. "This feeling of being complete." "Neither did I," Vincent admitted. "But here we are." "Here we are," Margaret echoed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, a family built from loss and grief and the courage to love again. It hadn't been easy, and there were still hard days when the past crept in. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Vincent looked at his wife, his son, his home, his life. It wasn't the life he planned. It wasn't the life he expected. But it was his, hard-won and precious and full of second chances. And that was more than enough. 3 months later, Margaret discovered she was pregnant. She took the test in the bathroom at 6 in the morning, Vincent still asleep in their bed. She sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the 2 pink lines, her heart racing. She was 41. This wasn't planned. They had never even discussed having kids together. Michael was 15, practically grown. They were past this stage of life, and yet, Margaret pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, shocked tears, terrified tears all mixed together. She walked back into the bedroom and shook Vincent awake. "Vincent, Vincent, wake up." He came awake immediately, years of early morning business calls making him alert. "What's wrong? Is Michael okay?" "Michael's fine. Everyone's fine, but I need to tell you something." Margaret held up the pregnancy test. Vincent stared at it, his brain clearly trying to process. Are you?" "I'm pregnant." Vincent sat up fully, taking the test from her hands. He looked at it again. "You're pregnant. We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Margaret confirmed, trying to read his expression. "I know we didn't plan this. I know it's a shock. If you need time to process." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I never thought I'd get this chance. After Sarah, after the years of trying and failing, I accepted it wasn't going to happen. But Margaret, I want this. I want this so much." Margaret started crying again, relief flooding through her. "I want this too. I'm terrified, but I want this." They told Michael that evening. He was sprawled on the couch playing video games when they asked him to pause for a minute. "What's up?" he asked, setting down the controller. Margaret and Vincent exchanged glances. They had rehearsed this conversation, but now that the moment was here, Margaret's mind went blank. "Your mother and I have some news," Vincent said. "It's good news, but it's also going to be a change." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You're not moving again, are we? Because I finally like this school." "No, we're not moving," Margaret said. "Michael, I'm pregnant. You're going to be a big brother." Michael's mouth fell open. "Seriously, seriously." For a long moment, Michael just stared at them. Then he broke into a huge grin. "That's awesome. I'm going to be a big brother." "Wait until I tell my friends." He paused. "It better not be a girl, though. Girls are weird." Vincent laughed. "You might not get a vote on that. Can I help pick the name? And can I teach it stuff, like baseball and cooking?" Michael was talking fast now, excited. "Do we need to set up a room? When is it coming? Is Mom going to get really big? Jake's mom just had a baby and she was huge." "Michael," Margaret said, laughing, "one question at a time." They spent the evening talking about due dates and plans and all the changes a baby would bring. Michael had a million questions and opinions. He wanted to convert the guest room into a nursery, wanted to help paint, wanted to be involved in everything. That night, after Michael went to bed, Vincent and Margaret lay in the dark, his hand on her stomach. "I can't believe this is happening," Vincent said. "A baby, our baby. Are you really okay with this? I know it's not what we planned." "The best things in my life have been unplanned," Vincent said. "Meeting you was unplanned. Falling in love again was unplanned. Becoming Michael's father was unplanned. This baby is just another beautiful surprise." Margaret turned to face him. "I'm scared. I was 26 when I had Michael. I'm 41 now. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll handle it together. But don't borrow trouble, love. Let's take this one day at a time." The pregnancy was harder than Margaret's first. She was exhausted constantly, nauseated for months, uncomfortable in ways she didn't remember from carrying Michael. Vincent was attentive to the point of being overprotective, which drove Margaret crazy even as it touched her heart. Michael took his big brother role seriously. He read books about newborn care, watched YouTube videos about how to hold babies, and drove Margaret nuts with constant questions about whether she was eating enough, resting enough, drinking enough water. "I already have one overprotective man in my life," Margaret told him. "I don't need two." "Too bad," Michael said cheerfully. "You're stuck with us." In her 6th month, Margaret had a scare. Bleeding and cramping sent her to the hospital, Vincent driving like a madman while Michael sat in the back seat white-knuckled and silent. The three of them waited in the emergency room, time moving like sludge. The doctor finally came out. "The baby's fine. False alarm, but we want to keep you overnight for observation and put you on modified bed rest for the next few weeks." The relief was so intense Margaret thought she might pass out. Vincent buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Michael hugged his mother carefully, like she might break. "You scared me," he whispered. "I scared me too," Margaret admitted. The bed rest was torture for someone as active as Margaret. She couldn't work on her projects, could barely move from the couch. Vincent worked from home as much as possible, setting up his laptop at the kitchen table so he could keep an eye on her. Michael appointed himself her guardian, bringing her books and snacks and making sure she followed doctor's orders. "This is ridiculous," Margaret complained after a week. "I feel fine." "Doctor said bed rest," Michael said firmly. "So that's what you're doing. Now do you want tea or water?" Vincent hid his smile. "You raised a very stubborn son." "I wonder where he gets it from," Margaret muttered. In early February, on a snowy morning when the world was quiet and white, Margaret went into labor. Vincent drove through the snow while Margaret timed contractions in the passenger seat. Michael stayed with Vincent's sister, pacing her living room and texting Vincent updates, demanding updates every 5 minutes. The labor was long and hard. Margaret hadn't remembered it being this painful with Michael, but then again, she'd been 15 years younger. Vincent stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand, murmuring encouragement, being her anchor. At 3:42 in the afternoon, their daughter was born. 6 pounds, 8 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly. The nurse placed her on Margaret's chest and Margaret started crying. Vincent was crying too, his hand on their daughter's tiny back, overwhelmed by the reality of her. "Hi, baby girl," Margaret whispered. "We've been waiting for you." They named her Sarah Rebecca. Sarah for Vincent's first wife, Rebecca for Margaret's mother. Honoring the past while welcoming the future. When they brought Sarah home 2 days later, Michael was waiting on the front porch despite the cold. He followed them inside, hovering anxiously. "Can I hold her?" he asked. Vincent showed him how to support her head, how to cradle her in his arms. Michael sat on the couch, staring down at his baby sister with wonder. "She's so small," he said. "Was I this small?" "Smaller," Margaret said. You were a pre-Emmy. I'm going to protect her, Michael announced. Nobody's going to mess with my sister. She's lucky to have you, Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. The first few months were chaos. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, learning Sarah's cries and rhythms. Margaret was exhausted in a way she hadn't been since Michael was a baby. But Vincent was an active partner, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers, walking Sarah around the house at 3 in the morning when she wouldn't settle. Michael was surprisingly helpful too. He'd hold Sarah while Margaret showered, make bottles, keep her entertained with silly faces and songs. He was a natural big brother, gentle and patient. One evening, Vincent found Margaret in the nursery, standing over Sarah's crib and crying softly. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, checking the baby. Sarah was sleeping peacefully. "Nothing's wrong," Margaret said. "Everything's right, that's the problem. I'm so happy and it terrifies me, because I know how quickly everything can be taken away." Vincent wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I know. I'm terrified too. Every time she sleeps too long, I check to make sure she's breathing. Every time you drive somewhere with her, I worry, but we can't live in fear, love. We have to trust that we'll have time, that we'll get to watch her grow up. What if we don't? Then we'll treasure every single moment we do get. But I have to believe we'll get decades. That we'll see her first steps, first day of school, graduation, wedding. I have to believe in the future or I'll drive myself crazy." Margaret turned in his arms. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had good teachers." Vincent kissed her forehead. "Come to bed. Sarah will be up in a few hours for a feeding and you need rest. In a minute. I just want to watch her a little longer." Vincent understood. He'd spent countless hours just watching Sarah sleep, marveling at her existence. This tiny person who was half him, half Margaret. A miracle he never thought he'd have. Sarah grew and changed, hitting milestones that filled Vincent and Margaret with pride and panic in equal measure. Her first smile, first laugh, first tooth. Michael documented everything on his phone, taking hundreds of pictures and videos. On Sarah's first birthday, they threw a party in the backyard. Family and friends came, filling the house with noise and laughter. Sarah sat in her high chair, smashing cake into her face with delighted enthusiasm, her dark hair tied up in tiny pigtails with pink bows. Vincent stood off to the side, taking it all in. Michael was teaching his cousins some baseball technique. Margaret was laughing with Vincent's sister. Sarah was covered in frosting, squealing happily. This was his family, built from pieces of broken hearts and second chances. Imperfect and complicated and absolutely perfect. Margaret caught his eye across the yard and smiled, that smile she reserved just for him. Vincent smiled back, his heart full to bursting. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" someone said beside him. Vincent turned to find an older woman, a neighbor he'd met a few times. "All three of them are," Vincent said. "You're a lucky man." "I know," Vincent said simply. "Believe me, I know." That night, after everyone left and Sarah was asleep and Michael was in his room doing homework, Vincent and Margaret collapsed on the couch together. "Successful party," Margaret said, her head on his shoulder. "Very successful." Sarah seemed to enjoy eating her cake more than actually eating it. "That's the mark of a good first birthday," Margaret yawned. "I can't believe she's already one. It went so fast." "Too fast," Vincent agreed. "Before we know it, she'll be Michael's age. Let's not rush it. I'm barely surviving the baby stage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the house quiet around them. Finally, Vincent said, "Margaret, I need to tell you something." She lifted her head to look at him, concerned. "That sounds serious." "It's not bad, I've been thinking about Sarah, my Sarah." Vincent took a breath. "When she died, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel joy again, never love again, never want to get up in the morning. I was wrong, and I've felt guilty about that. Guilty that I found happiness when she's gone. Margaret took his hand, listening. But lately I've realized something. Sarah would want this for me. She'd want me to be happy, to find love again, to have the family we always dreamed about. She was too generous, too loving to want me to spend my life alone and miserable. And I think, somehow, she'd be glad it was you. Because you understand loss. You honor the people we loved while building something new. You made space for Sarah in our lives without feeling threatened by her memory. She was your wife, Margaret said softly. She'll always be part of you. I'd never want you to forget her. Thank you for that. Thank you for understanding. Vincent kissed her gently. I love you, I love our family, I love the life we've built. I'm finally, truly at peace. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, so much. They held each other, two broken people who found wholeness together. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when it felt impossible. But they'd worked through the grief and guilt and fear. They'd chosen each other, every single day. The years passed in a blur of soccer games and school plays, family dinners and quiet moments. Michael graduated high school with honors, got into a good college with a baseball scholarship. Sarah started preschool, then kindergarten, a bright and happy child who inherited her mother's creativity and her father's determination. Margaret's business thrived, expanding to 3 states. Vincent handed over day-to-day operations of Armstrong Industries to a trusted team, transitioning to chairman of the board so he could spend more time with his family. They bought a vacation house in Maine, on the beach where Vincent and Sarah had gotten married all those years ago. Margaret worried it might be painful for Vincent, but he insisted. That beach holds happy memories, he said. I want to make new happy memories there with you and our kids. So they spent summers in Maine, building sandcastles and swimming in the cold Atlantic, barbecuing on the deck and watching sunsets. Michael brought his girlfriend one summer, a smart pre-med student named Emma who Margaret immediately adored. Sarah learned to kayak, to identify birds, to love the ocean as much as her parents did. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent and Margaret renewed their vows on that same beach. Michael walked his mother down the aisle again, 25 years old and tall and handsome. Sarah was their flower girl, 9 years old and taking her job very seriously. They stood facing each other as the waves crashed behind them, the setting sun painting everything gold. 10 years ago, Vincent said, I promised to love you for the rest of my life. Today I renew that promise with a decade of proof behind it. You are my best friend, my partner, my home. Every day with you is a gift. Margaret was crying, as she always did at these moments. 10 years ago you gave me hope when I thought I'd never feel it again. You loved my son as your own. You gave me a daughter I never expected. You built a life with me that's more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. I love you, Vincent Armstrong. Today, tomorrow, always. They kissed as their friends and family cheered, as Michael Wolfe whistled and Sarah giggled. Then they danced on the beach as the stars came out, swaying to music only they could hear later that night, after Sarah was asleep in her room and Michael had gone out with Emma. Vincent and Margaret sat on their deck overlooking the ocean. You ever think about how we met? Margaret asked. At my mother's funeral. It seems like such an unlikely place to find love. The best love stories often start in unexpected places, Vincent said. I went to that funeral expecting to pay my respects and leave. Instead, I met you. We were both so broken. We were, but we healed each other. Not completely, maybe. I don't know if you ever completely heal from losing someone, but enough. Enough to be whole again. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the moonlight on the water. Do you think they'd be happy for us, David and Sarah? Vincent thought about this. He'd thought about it a lot over the years. Yes, I think they loved us. They'd want us to be happy. I like to think they're together somewhere, Margaret said, having coffee and comparing notes about us, laughing at our mistakes, cheering for our victories. Sarah would definitely be giving me advice on how to handle a daughter. I had no idea how much effort goes into managing a 9-year-old girl's social life. Margaret laughed. It only gets worse. Wait until she's a teenager. I'm choosing not to think about that. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with years of companionship. Vincent thought about the journey that brought him here. The loss, the grief, the slow climb back to joy, meeting Margaret, falling in love, building a family. It hadn't erased the pain of losing Sarah, but it had given him a reason to keep going. More than that, it had given him happiness he thought he'd never feel again. "Vincent," Margaret said, "thank you. For what? For driving to Vermont that day, for asking me to dinner, for being patient while I figured out how to love again, for being a father to Michael, for giving me Sarah, for 10 years of happiness." Margaret turned to look at him. "For choosing me." Vincent cupped her face in his hands. "I'll choose you every single day for the rest of my life." They kissed, soft and sweet, the ocean breeze wrapping around them. Inside, they could hear Sarah calling for water, Michael and Emma coming in the front door. Their family, loud and chaotic and perfect, Vincent and Margaret went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Because they'd learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that love doesn't end with loss, that the heart is capable of more than you ever imagined, that even in the darkest grief, hope can bloom again. They had been two widowed people who met at a funeral, both certain their chance at love had passed. Instead, they found each other. They learned to love again, to trust again, to believe in forever again. And they lived happily ever after, not because their lives were perfect or without pain, but because they faced everything together. With love, with patience, with the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving loss and finding joy on the other side. Their story wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more changes, more moments of grief mixed with celebration. Michael would graduate college and get married. Sarah would grow up, with all the drama and delight that entailed. Vincent and Margaret would grow old together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing, their love only deepening with time. But on that anniversary night in Maine, with their family sleeping under one roof and the waves singing outside their window, Vincent and Margaret had everything they needed. They had each other, they had their children, they had a love that had survived the worst life could throw at them. They had learned the most important lesson, that widowers and widows could find love again, that broken hearts could heal, that life after loss could be beautiful and full and worth living. And as they fell asleep that night in each other's arms, both Vincent and Margaret smiled, grateful beyond words for the second chance they'd been given, for the unexpected love that bloomed from grief, for the family they'd built from broken pieces. They never expected to learn to love again. But they did, and it made all the difference.